Was tough on Māori communities. 40% of the male Māori workforce was unemployed compared to only 12% for Pākehā. Plus, it was much more difficult for Māori to apply for pensions and benefits, and they often got less money than Pākehā. One relief scheme paid a single Māori man 9.5 shillings per week, whereas a Pākehā man got 12 to 17.5.
The government argued Māori didn't need as much money because most Māori lived rurally and, in theory, could grow their own food. But of course, by this point, Māori had lost most of their productive farmland, so that idea was questionable.
There were some improvements for Māori in the 20s and 30s. The population had started to rise after the horrific decline of the 19th century, and Māori perspectives started to find their way into the Pākehā-dominated government.
One of the most significant Māori politicians was Apirana Ngata, you'll remember from last episode. He was Native Affairs Minister for 6 of those years, and sometimes he served as the Deputy Prime Minister.
Along with his young Māori Party allies like Maui Pomari, Ngata convinced the government to help fund the development of Māori farmland. He also helped organise a major investigation of land confiscation and misuse of fisheries.
But those investigations didn't stop the pressure for land. The government bought large areas so they could be granted to returned servicemen from the First World War. Between 1912 and 1939, Māori land ownership fell from just over 3 million hectares to about 1.4 million. 100 years after signing the Treaty of Waitangi, Māori now owned less than 6% of Aotearoa.
Ngata and his allies weren't only focused on land, they also worked to preserve aspects of Māori culture. Ngata got funding for a traditional carving school in Rotorua. He organised the recording of oral history in Waiata. New marae were built and kapahaka competitions were held.
Another major Māori political figure in this era was the Kingitanga leader, Te Puea Hirangi, who we met last episode. Te Puea was involved in all kinds of efforts to build jobs, farms and marae in the Waikato region. She led a revitalisation of the Kingitanga movement. In 1920, Kingitanga bought 10 acres of confiscated land on the banks of the Waikato River opposite the town of Ngaruawahia. They spent years working to clear and drain this land and fighting legal battles with Pākehā who wanted them removed from the region.
Te Puea kept up the community's morale. She spent her time teaching histories and legends to rangatahi, jumping up to demonstrate how to perform haka or pukana. She spoke about the shared heritage of Waikato tribes and the importance of their long-term generational struggle to survive.
Eventually, the land at Ngaruawahia became the site of Turanga Waiwai Marae, and that marae is still the centre of Kingitanga power today.
The leaders like Te Puea Hirangi and Apirana Ngata faced competition from a new movement in Te Ao Māori, the rise of the Ratana Church. Tahu Pōtiki Wiremu Ratana was a 45-year-old farmer near Whanganui. He was looking out from his porch, smoking a pipe, when he thought he had a spiritual vision. After the 1918 flu pandemic, he gained a reputation as a faith healer and built up followers for the Ratana Church. By the 1920s, hundreds of people were coming to visit his home, and when he travelled around the country, his sermons drew crowds of thousands.
Ratana was both a spiritual and a political leader, but he became increasingly alienated from movements like Kingitanga and the Young Māori Party, which considered his faith sort of too radical. In 1928, as the economic situation started turning for the worse, Ratana fully dedicated himself to politics. He encouraged his followers to run for the 4 Māori seats in Parliament, with a prophecy that those seats would become the 4 quarters of his body. Ratana also started secret negotiations with Michael Joseph Savage. In the same election where Labour took power, Ratana's followers won 2 out of the 4 Māori seats, and those MPs entered an alliance with the Labour Party.
By 1943, Ratana's prophecy was realised. His followers won all 4 Māori electorate seats. The Labour-Ratana alliance won some significant victories for Māori. Labour equalised Māori access to welfare and pensions. Their new healthcare system also led to big long-term improvements. This involved some really basic steps like making sure Māori homes had water tanks and bathrooms, and creating portable isolation huts for treating infectious diseases like tuberculosis. Over the next 2 decades, average Māori life expectancy rose by more than 10 years.
This improvement fed into a belief among many Pākehā that New Zealand had, quote, the best race relations in the world. Many people believed Māori were being successfully assimilated into Pākehā society.
But those ideas were based on some pretty sweeping assumptions. First, it assumed Māori wanted to be assimilated. Second, it ignored the root causes of Māori inequality, the injustices of colonisation and the Crown's ongoing refusal to honour the treaty. Also, some policies introduced in this era did long-lasting damage to Māori communities, particularly education policies.
There had been Māori educational success stories in New Zealand, particularly at Te Aute College, which turned out to be